welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am Dan. With me is Josh.
Hello, everybody.
As usual, and we're 61 episodes into this lovely walk down Earthdawn Lane, and tonight we'll be discussing all things thaumaturgical, because we're going to do a study in the kind of getting into the weeds a little bit of spell acquisition in all of the different editions of Earthdawn, and exactly how to get spells after your character's been created. And so we can kind of go through how this has changed and evolved over time and things like that. We don't have any questions to answer right now, so if you want to send us a question, by all means do so at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. How to gather and collect spells after your character is made, because there have been some differences in the editions over the years, and I took some serious notes with page numbers and everything to kind of go over what the thought process is. So we're going to get in the weeds like we did for Forged Blade and Astral Space. Year 2021 is like getting into the weeds year. So
our first year was covering a lot of the basics, and now we're getting into we're out of the 101 courses. We're now into maybe the 201s.
Yeah, I agree.
If you think of this as a university course.
Yes, because the second half of every discipline's talent progression is forthcoming in somewhere this year. So we'll get to those. That's 201. Once you get your character to 8th circle, we'll get you past that with the rest of what we're going to talk about. But today, all things thaumaturgical. So let me lead Josh a little bit here. So he's the line developer, so we can kind of walk down this lane here. In first edition, page 151, you get your starting spells, which is equal to your perception step. Not a lot's changed over the years, except for one instance. But after character creation, there's nowhere in there that I could find on a cursory glance that says how you get spells after that.
Well, there is. It's just that it is subject to the whims of what you are able to come across. You learn in first edition, you get your starting spells, and then you learn new spells by finding grimoires in kaers, or by, learning spells from other magicians.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's nothing that gives you any additional spells for free.
Yeah.
You have to track down the spells and learn them. And that's done with what in first edition was the read write magic talent.
Yeah.
That basically you learn the spell and transcribe it into your grimoire. And there are sections pretty sure it's in the beginning of the spell magic chapter of first edition that talks about the process of learning new spells.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there's nothing that what you have your starting allotment, and then, you gain additional spells based on what you can find.
Yeah. And as I've said many, many podcasts ago, like episode 1 or 2, I've run most, if not all, of the pre-gen adventures that were put out there. There's not a lot of grimoires to find to hand those out. So I had a really hard time. I still have a really hard time figuring out how to lace in where to get a grimoire from, or if you've acquired one or something along those lines for my players. But that's for later on in the episode or so. So there's no legend point cost. There's no silver cost. Just if you find a spell and you roll your read and write magic high enough, you can learn it, copy it to your grimoire, so forth and so on.
There's no codified silver cost.
Yeah. Fair.
I think that it's with the rules and the idea in there, especially where one of the aspects that's talked about with learning spells is that you get a bonus if someone is trying to teach, someone who knows the spell is trying to teach it to you. You get a bonus to your read and write magic test. And so while there's no codified silver cost, presumably there would be potentially one way that you could learn new spells is by paying somebody who knows the spell to teach it to you, in much the same way that you pay a trainer to advance in circle, or you pay somebody to teach you higher skill ranks and things like that. Yeah. It's just not something that I think offhand that is provided any detail in the book.
Not that I could remember, because I have a highlighted book like mad, and I couldn't find it again because this is many, many moons ago on first edition.
Right. And I haven't looked at those rules in quite some time. So
Absolutely.
I can't recall off the top of my head.
We're working on 4th. So it's okay. We're here to lead people through the progression as to how we got to 4th and what that looks like.
Yes.
So 2nd edition, after Fawcett kind of closed his doors summarily, your starting spells moved over into being based upon your willpower step and not your perception step. This is this is the first and only departure from that.
Well, it is one of 2 notable departures in 2nd edition from 1st edition. One of them is the changeover for starting spells to be willpower. And I think part of that, from what I'm vaguely remembering, was to do a little bit in the course of character creation to spread out, to not have quite so much emphasis on certain things.
So perception wouldn't do all the heavy lifting. It would just do half of it.
Right. So that everything wouldn't be based on perception, so that the number, because your spellcasting, your thread weaving talents, those are both your read write magic for magicians, because it largely still used the 1st edition talent progression and the talents that were available. So you got read write magic, read write language, spellcasting, thread weaving, 2 matrices, and karma ritual.
Yeah.
As your magician started with 7 talents at first circle. And all of those, except for karma ritual and the 2 matrices, which aren't based on an attribute at all, are all based on perception. And I think the idea was that, well, let's have something to start off that's based on willpower, because willpower is important for effect tests. Willpower is an important attribute.
Yes.
So let's make this so that I don't know that it was necessarily ever a problem, and maybe this is just because of the way that I approach building characters in general. But the idea being that you dump everything you possibly can to get your perception as high as possible and not worry about willpower quite so much, because eventually you'll get will force, whether that's 4th circle Nethermancer or 5th circle for everybody else, basically. And so it might have been just a way to, hey, if somebody is going to go that route with their character build, that if they're going to go perception uber alles, that they do not have as many spells to start off with because they shorted their willpower. And I don't think for most characters it's actually that big a deal to at least get a decent selection. You could, this is the case in 1st and 2nd, and I'm pretty sure later editions as well, you are not limited to just 1st circle spells when you're creating your character using those points.
Correct.
A 1st circle spell costs 1 point. So you can pick up a 2nd circle spell. It costs 2 points.
Yep.
Understanding, of course, that as a 1st circle character, the only way that you'll be able to, especially under 1st edition rules, the only way that you would be able to cast a 2nd circle spell is through raw magic until you reach 2nd circle. And that is something that has stayed in place throughout all of the editions.
Yes.
The other thing that 2nd edition did is introduced the idea of paying legend points to learn spells.
Nope.
This is one of the things.
I couldn't find that anywhere.
Really? Could have sworn that they did.
They
that.
had you got so when you went up a circle, you got your new circle times 2 in spell points to purchase new spells with for 2nd edition.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, because that was on page 147. And then if you happen to get someone to teach you spells, it was 50 silver pieces times the spell level you were trying to learn. But I couldn't find a legend point cost in there. I may just not have looked deep enough.
Well, I know the example that's on page 148.
Oh, there we go.
The examples there talk about spending the legend points.
Okay.
To do that. Yeah.
Okay,
it's the first full paragraph on page 148.
I just
right
didn't
above
turn
the spell
page.
difficulty table. Each new spell copied into a magician's grimoire costs a number of legend points equal to 100 times the circle of the spell.
Okay.
So a first circle spell is 100, a second is 200, 300, etc.
Gotcha.
So there's that. The other thing that 2nd edition did with regards to magicians, and one of the reasons, 1st edition, it didn't cost legend points to learn new spells. You just, if you could make the test, you could learn them. 2nd edition, because of the prevalence, and we've talked about the multidiscipline encouragement that happened because of the way that multidiscipline rules worked in 1st edition.
Yeah.
So the ease of being a multidiscipline character in terms of legend point cost and overlapping talents for magicians in first edition, coupled with versatility for humans, picking up thread weaving from other magician disciplines, not going full multidiscipline, but being able to cast spells of other disciplines by picking up their thread weaving. There was, at least among the online community and those who were involved in the playtesting of second edition, because a lot of us were online at that time, the perception of spellcasters being a little bit overpowered, especially once you got into higher circles and had so many spells potentially available and the power of them and things like that.
Yeah.
That there was an effort to, for lack of a better term, to nerf them, to try and scale back on, or make it a little bit more costly for a magician to pull out all the stops as far as major power. And so they introduce legend point costs for spells so that a magician who is going the multidiscipline route, or a human who's picking that up with versatility, has to sink additional legend points in order to learn those additional spells.
Gotcha.
The counteract of that was, well, okay, when they advance to a new circle, they get some points to pick up a couple of spells
for free
of their new discipline circle so that they have spells there for free. It doesn't cost legend points to learn those.
Yeah.
But that they get those so that they have the fun toys to play with for their new discipline or their new circle.
A whole bunch of record keeping in second edition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a downtime record keeping thing. It's not a huge problem. Like, it's not something that's going to largely affect in the midst of, like, it's not something that's going to come up in the midst of combat. So that's like, it's kind of two different kinds of record keeping. The other thing that second edition did is that second edition introduced the idea of the spell matrices that are learned, that are given by each discipline, are unique to that discipline. And so you can only put elementalist spells in elementalist matrices. You can only put wizard spells into wizard matrices. That was something that was done to cause problems for versatile spellcasters. Basically requiring them to learn under versatility matrices of another discipline, meaning an even higher legend point cost overall to kind of go that route. Second edition did some changes, like introduced something with the idea of trying to cast from your own grimoire, which was something that couldn't really be done in first edition. Anyway, bunch of stuff done in second edition to try and address the multidiscipline magician and versatile magician problems.
Yes.
I disagreed with the idea of discipline-specific matrices because under first edition, there was a limit, like you could only learn as many total matrices as were available across all of your magician disciplines. So most disciplines got 4 standard matrices. The wizard only got 3, but the wizard got an additional of a higher type 1 later on. So that the total number of matrices across all 15 circles for each magician discipline ended up being the same.
Yes.
Total. It's just they might have been divided up a little differently between standard and enhanced and share and armored, blah, blah, blah.
Correct. I did a little Excel spreadsheet chart on that once upon a time, and they are a little bit all fiddly.
The limiter was that, great, if you are a versatile or you are a multi-discipline magician who knows 2 or 3 disciplines, magician disciplines, and has spells access from all of those, you are still only limited to having 2 or 3 or 4 matrices at any given time. You've just got more spells that you can slot in, but you are still limited to however many you can have at the time. That versatility, that basically introducing the discipline-specific matrices, meant that, now a dual discipline magician can have 2 wizard spells and 2 elementalist spells, for example, ready to go in their starting matrices right off the gate, as opposed to needing to decide which of their wizard and elementalist spells they are going to put. They're twice as many spells. They're still only limited to 2 matrices. People who are familiar with 4th edition may see where some of the stuff that came from out of that. Anyway.
Yes.
A lot of stuff going on with second edition in terms of trying to address the problem of magicians picking up multiple disciplines, picking up versatile.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of in-setting restrictions kind of that would be in place there, but they were not really supported or backed up by the mechanics.
Understood. Moving on to Classic, because Classic came out before Third. So Classic had started off the exact same way. Your starting spells points are equal to your perception step. That's back to first edition, because second edition it moved to willpower. You get now, when you get to second circle and third circle and fourth circle and fifth circle, you get one free spell from whoever's training you to do so.
Right.
So that's page, since you're looking it up in the book, that's page 64. That's page 64. So you get one free one.
Yes.
And if you come across any spells or want to get your mentor to teach you more, it's 100 silver now, not 50. 100 silver times the spell's circle, which is an optional rule. Or also the legend point cost is based upon the talent rank of novice talents as well. So that's actually Classic had that.
What page is the legend point cost on?
I think 284.
I mean, it's not weird. I obviously agree with the decision. I just didn't think that it was... Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The spell legend point cost and the spell learning cost sidebar that's on page 284 of the Red Brick Player's Compendium from Classic, those
tome
are labeled as optional rules. And that's probably why I wasn't...
Fair.
Okay. Those were, I think, left in there in part because of second edition.
Mm-hmm. And they just made the silver cost easier. Instead of 50, they made it 100 because everything else is usually 100 as well. So it's also easier math for downtime.
So if people felt that paying legend points for spells was necessary, if they wanted to do that, those rules were still there, but it was not the default assumption.
Yeah.
It was clearly marked as an optional rule.
Yeah. So, but that's where they were. That's where they ended up. So, but this is one of those. So let's pretend, for example, we've got a character made for any of the magician classes, disciplines. So at first edition, you get yours, let's say 7 for your perception step. That's it. In second edition, you get 7, but every circle you get 2 times your circle in spell points to get new spells forever. There's no limit. Now in Classic Edition, they say, you get your 7 beginning spells, same character, but you get a free one at second circle, a free one at third circle, a free one at fourth circle, and a last bonus free spell at fifth circle. That's it. So maybe you get 5 more for nothing. So you're up to 12 free spells.
4 more because you get your starters at
second,
first,
third,
and then
fourth,
second, third, fourth, fifth. So that's 4
I didn't
additional.
do the math right. Yeah. So that's it. So 4 more plus your 7. Math is hard. I can't math today. So you get 11 total spells for free before you have to do any other legend point costs or silver cost. That's Classic. Yeah. So it kind of homogenized maybe both first and second.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, first didn't give you anything bonus. Second gave you more points to spent the same way that you get them at character creation. But Classic, I think, just simplified it and said you get basically as part of your training to a new circle, your master teaches you a spell of your new circle, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's included as part of your training.
Yeah. So, okay.
But they stopped doing that. They stopped, like, you get one last one when you become a journeyman, when you reach fifth circle. Yes. And then after that, you're on your own.
Yeah, whatever you find.
You still conceivably learn. Yeah, you still could conceivably learn spells from your master when you were advancing circles elsewhere. But there's no more free ride.
Yeah, pretty much. So I just love, so Classic at least kind of honed in on the, or put a limit on, you just took as many points every single circle until the end of your progression. We'll put a limit on that. You get to, fifth and then you're done. So one spell each, that's all. So on to third edition, which is exactly the same way. You get your starting character. Your spell points are equal to your perception step. Again, to Josh's point earlier, first circle spells are 1 point. Second circle spells are 2 points. You can't cast them until you get your matrix up to rank 2, so forth and so on. And you get 1 new spell per circle again in third edition at second, third, fourth, and another one at fifth. So they kind of kept that from Classic right there. And the optional rule was still the, if you want to spend, you have to spend 100 silver times the circle of the spell to pay for learning it, to acquire it from the master. And your legend point cost is again equal to the novice talent rank cost, so it's the Fibonacci scale. So
right. So, and again, marked as an optional rule.
Yeah. So those are optional rules. So really third edition didn't stray, I don't think at all, from Classic.
Yeah, 3rd edition kept things the same as Classic in that regard.
So now we get to 4th.
And we get to 4th. And when it comes to spells, we kept the perception step and spell points.
Yep.
We no longer grant free spells on advancement. And we made the legend point cost no longer optional, but mandatory. And it follows the same cost sequence that the circle, it's basically buying like a one-time cost of
a new talent.
The talent off of the novice rank. A 3rd circle spell costs as if you were buying just rank 3, so 300 legend for that. Now, to counteract that, we give you matrices for free, and they advance for free.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that despite it being an optional rule in there, that most people did not use that optional rule, and in 3rd edition got spells for free.
Yeah.
Because there was a bit of an initial backlash. I think that the versatility of toolkit that spells provide, I think that's something that you should need to invest in.
Mm-hmm.
And I can recognize the argument from people who feel that it ends up hampering, that basically getting 2 talents that advance for free does not really counteract the legend point investment that is required to be a magician, or to be a magician that's got a really big suite of spells. And we've heard the complaints about the number of spells available. We're not going to address that today, but that a magician, that with the same number of legend points, a magician in theory ends up being a little bit behind their non-spellcasting companions when it comes to their circle, because a magician needs to invest points that could go into advancing their talents, which would advance their circle, into spells in order to have more spells. I recognize that argument. I just don't think that in the grand scheme of things, it actually hampers magicians that much.
Fair.
That, your swordmaster might hit 5th circle a couple of, have the points or qualify for 5th circle a couple of sessions before the wizard does.
Mm-hmm.
Just basically, because if a magician has to spend the legend points to the equivalent talent cost of buying a talent like one of their 4th circle talents from nothing up to the rank 5 that's needed for advancement to 5th circle, costs the same as buying a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th circle spell. So that 5 spells is the equivalent to 1 talent being brought up to that point. Okay. I don't think that when you start talking about the number of the actual number of legend points being involved, the other stuff that characters can spend legend points on, I don't personally find it a very compelling argument. I can understand it. Or I recognize it, but I don't find it particularly compelling given, there are only so many spells.
Well, and it doesn't seem to be, to me, all that prohibitive when a spell is a one-time purchase.
Right. You pay a one-time flat cost, and then you've got this additional. It's like picking up a knack. Essentially, I think I've mentioned it on the show before, and we've certainly talked about it in other places, that sort of from a game mechanical standpoint, picking up a spell, which gives you an additional tool, an additional toy, an additional power to play with, is... you need to spend legend points to learn knacks, which are also new powers and toys and so forth that have a one-time cost. It's just that knacks are not necessarily seen as required the way that spells are, and that's perhaps a fair argument. But again, I don't think in the grand scheme of things the actual legend point differential makes that big a difference. You're not looking at a situation like, say, from old school AD&D, where the number of experience points that were required for the different classes to advance were dramatically different. And like in basic D&D, the old red box system and whatnot, a thief advanced at 1,250 was second level and was like 2,500 at third level, whereas an elf in that system had to get 4,000 before they reached second level, and that you could end up with some potential disparity between character power in that regard.
Yeah.
I just don't find it hugely compelling, and I don't think the differential is that big when it comes to magicians, especially when it comes to the tools and toys that they can bring to bear as a result of being spellcasters.
I have no argument with that whatsoever. So I agree. So we've got our beginning character. We've got 7 spells to begin with, maybe 6 if you want to get a second circle spell and all that jazz. So here's where my problem has been as a game master for the last 20 years, running all the pre-gen adventures, is in the pre-gens, most of the time, it's really hard to come across a grimoire. So I think, listening to the Legends of Earthdawn podcast, that Cliff made a special sidebar, and he did a really good job, where Virag went and stopped by somebody's, I'm fumbling for the words, went to the another Mancer in the town, met their assistant.
we stopped by the floating city.
Yeah, that's where it was.
And I went and I had a RP heavy session where I basically had a one-on-one with another Mancer there in the floating city for like half an hour or something.
It was like 40 episodes ago, so my memory's not all that great.
But as part of that was like, hey, I'm looking to learn some spells.
Yes.
Right. So but we also had one of the adventures where we were delving into the ruins of Parlainth, came across a lab or something like that had, an elementalist grimoire in it. Obviously, we got the library from Palinthrax's tower that had a whole bunch of magical stuff in it. Yeah, certainly, especially when you start looking at some of the semi-third-party stuff that was created, like things that were released originally in the Earthdawn Journal, some of the shards and whatnot that were created with Classic.
Yeah.
Grimoires were not something that were necessarily there as a deliberate reward, but, for example, Infected, the adventure Infected has a Nethermancer NPC in it.
Yeah.
And if something happens and you are able to actually kill the Nethermancer, you can find their grimoire, and if you have another Nethermancer in the group, learn the spells in it. So I think it's largely a matter of just the GM needs to put the opportunity for magicians to get access to spells as part of what's going on.
Yeah.
They're going to be learning their new circle from a magician of their discipline anyway. That's plenty of opportunity for a magician to learn new spells. Okay. There's just not really any guidance in the book about, well, how much does it cost kind of thing.
Yeah. So I was going to say, so you're more experienced at this than I am. I was going to say, walk us through a little bit on how to lace in some of those opportunities as you're playing through any adventure at all. Is it just basically finding one from somebody, like we give out 3 examples from what Cliff has been able to do in the Legends of Earthdawn, which is you can go to a town and find another Mancer or find a wizard or whatever the case may be. Do you just ask around for the nearest one, or does everyone know where they are, or are these people keeping kind of secrets?
Well, I mean, I would presume like any adept, particularly if they're more experienced, they have a reputation. There's the tiers of fame that you can kind of extrapolate from the legend point totals that are in the books, whether somebody is known of or not. But a magician, you could do a half magic test, perception based half magic test to see if your character knows of somebody, might have heard of somebody in the area. Certainly doing like a streetwise test if you've got somebody in the group that has a skill like that allows you to learn information about an area. Charisma based half magic, perhaps. There's a lot of, or you could just provide that information. It doesn't even necessarily need to be something that requires a test.
Yeah, it must be gleaned.
Yeah, adepts, especially if they have settled down and are in an area, somebody presumably will know about them, and you could get that information. Unless they are, some kind of super reclusive whatever out in the middle of nowhere and throw mind daggers at trespassers and things like that, trying to chase the revenuers off their land or whatever.
I'm writing that one down. Hang on. I'm going to write that one down. I'm going to use that. Just kidding.
But any magician that would be advanced enough that your character would presumably want to learn spells from them. Mm-hmm. Somebody would know them. They would have relationships. You would be able to learn that. Another possibility, if you're talking about a town or city, a city or something like that of a decent size that might have a library, mm-hmm. the most common spells would probably be available from grimoires that might be stored in a specialist library of some sort. I imagine that the Great Library of Thrall has grimoires in its collection that, with your fee to the library, that you could gain access to and potentially learn spells out of those.
Fair. So every once in a while in the text, I come across this word about a guild. So are there magician guilds hanging around Earthdawn in a lot of places? I would think any from any of the other adventures I've come across.
I mean, there are probably organizations of magicians. I don't think that, much like there are not province-wide religious organizations for questors, mm-hmm. there probably aren't province-wide organizations of magicians. I mean, we've talked about populations and how high circle adepts probably know each other because there aren't very many of them to begin mm-hmm. with.
Yeah.
And again, within a discipline, because you learn from higher circle members of your discipline, the wardens and masters, the higher circle journeymen of a discipline, there aren't going to be a whole lot of them. And so their names would presumably be known.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think that it's certainly possible that in the same way that you've got like merchant guilds within the Kingdom of Thrall, mm-hmm. you've got guilds that are sort of dedicated to different professions and services and whatnot, that you absolutely could have a guild or a brotherhood or something like that of magicians who follow a discipline, or maybe magicians of multiple disciplines who are sharing a common research goal or something like that, could work together and potentially share information amongst themselves. I think especially if you're looking at some of the earlier books, like some of the first edition books and some of the mm-hmm. earlier works released for first edition, I think there were some assumptions about a more D&D style world that ended up not getting fleshed out quite the same way as later books were developed and things were changed a little bit in terms of how the setting developed.
Fair.
But
like I said, I got tripped up on that word because I was like that.
I would think like an elementalist guild that would exist in Travar, you're not looking at something that's got
branch offices.
That's got scores of members. It might have a dozen members of it, and probably half of them are sort of apprentice level or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, large population centers like Thrall or Travar or Yorupa could absolutely have organizations that would maybe have multiple members of a magician discipline that all kind of maybe share information.
Cool. No, I'm just looking for how to lace in ideas for either the game master to use, or when the first time Earthdawn player makes their first time, spellcaster of any kind, once they play, a round or a session or two or three, where they could expect to inquire with their game master, great, where do I get some new spells? How do I find those? Where do I acquire them? And it's not just always going care delving and finding a grimoire that's, ancient and just hanging around waiting for them to find it. So it's just trying to figure out where other ideas could come from to kind of lace in for either the game master to drop hints at or dangle those carrots, or for the players to come, inquire on their own and look like they know what they're doing.
Yeah, that all seems...
So that was pretty much it. I wanted to go, like I said, walk through the weeds on the changes from first edition to fourth edition. A beginning player would create their spellcaster, figure out their spells, and we'll do each school of magic later on which maybe starting spells are the best, more versatile to use, and why some of them haven't been ported over just yet to 4th edition. But moreover, how to create your character, and once you've played a little bit, where that player could walk through their setting that the game master's laid out for them and expect to inquire as to where to gain new spells, who to talk to about learning them. If it's more downtime, of course it's more downtime because you can't do it in combat. But if it's not always care delving. Maybe it's inquiring in a certain town. Maybe it's, I don't know. That was what I was hoping we could get through the weeds on.
You can get a grimoire as a reward or treasure or something like that from an adventure, whether through defeating, killing an enemy spellcaster who happens to have their grimoire with them.
Yeah.
And being able to get some from that, or exploring a place where, a wizard's lab or something like that, where their grimoire or other kind of research notes might be in place to have that.
Yeah.
Or learning it from a master or mentor or higher circle member of your discipline. And obviously, if you're kind of following the advancement rules as written in the book, you are going to be encountering those on a semi-regular basis.
Yeah.
Or from a library or something like that.
Fair.
Those are all the options, and there is no reason that any of them should necessarily be restricted or limited in any sense. I mean, in much the same way as a GM might be coming up with ideas for thread items or modifying thread items that would be rewards for members of the group, whether you're doing something that is fully customized, intended for a particular character, or coming up, with whatever.
Yeah.
Magicians will be looking for spells. And so making sure that in some way spells are available to them is part of the GM's job, making sure that they are being given the rewards that are appropriate for them.
I agree. I would love to hear anybody else's ideas as to how they've either acquired spells as a player or wonderful new interesting ideas as to how the game master has dropped in a spell as either a reward or a treasure throughout their gaming lifespan. So that's me. So any other thoughts on the various editions and spell acquisition?
As I've mentioned elsewhere, I really like magicians. I really like spellcasters. They are, as we've talked about with the various sort of discipline overviews like we've done.
Yeah.
If you're a sort of crunchy tactical, there's more moving parts when it comes to a magician character in terms of what you need to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like them for that approach to gameplay. But that power comes with a little bit of an extra price that I think is warranted, given some of the issues that crop up when those guide rails aren't in place.
Yeah.
Potentially. But yeah, just in general, spells are great.
Fair. I do have one last question I just thought of, which is only the first edition actually had a spell creation worksheet. And I know we've kind of brought that up before, that 4th edition's not going to have that. And no other edition decided to renew that either. So since we're speaking of spell acquisition, you can't create your own spells in 4th edition. So
yeah, I know that one of on the I forget exactly who it is off the top of my head that's working on it, but he's got a blog. He's been sharing the links on the Earthdawn Guild on Facebook.
Yeah,
might be Rob from the one of the other AP podcasts.
Yeah,
I think he's.
I think he was Name Givers. Yeah,
I think he's Name Givers. Anyway, might be Rob, might not, but that's what's popping into my mind. Has been going through. Starting off right now with just the illusionist spells, because he's an illusionist, or he has a character in his group that's an illusionist.
Yeah.
And doing sort of 4th edition updates to illusionist spells that have not yet appeared in 4th edition that were around in previous editions. And it is kind of taking the guidelines, looking at spells that were ported over and how they changed, and kind of using those as a guideline. You are not limited by the spells that are just in the player's guide.
Yeah.
And I understand the desire or the caution maybe that goes along with, well, I don't want to adapt a spell from a previous edition that might show up in Morgan's big book of magic
is forthcoming.
That shows up in Deeper Secrets that is a different adaptation of that spell than what I created.
Yeah.
Because then I need to reconcile which one we're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand that, but my feeling on that is, especially if you are of a design, like if you're not a developer design, like if you're not an armchair developer designer, whatever, and you don't want to tackle that, that's fine. That is perfectly valid. I got to where I am by, I think a lot of GMs have maybe have a little bit of armchair designer about them. I mean, that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
Yep, me too.
But as long as you approach it in much the same way that you would, like if you're designing a thread item from scratch rather than using one that has been previously worked up, if you keep those open lines of communication with your group, in this case with your magician, and say, here's the spell. I know you really liked the spell from previous edition. It doesn't have a 4th edition version. Here's what I've worked up for a current 4th edition version.
Yeah.
Understand that, like, as it sees play, if we find that it's not appropriately balanced, if it's causing problems in this version, we might need to change some things or tone some things down.
Yeah.
One of the things that is a little bit easier when it comes to spell design in 4th edition is that the weaving difficulties are standardized.
Yep.
The weaving difficulty for all second circle spells is the same. And that's both for standard threads and reattuning on the fly.
Gotcha.
And what you can kind of look at is spells that maybe have a similar kind of effect and see what the extra threads might do or what the extra successes might do on similar spells, and just use that as a baseline and go from there.
Okay. Fair. Thank you for walking my rudimentary brain through all of the additions and changes about how to acquire spells, where to acquire spells, and what that should cost you to acquire spells. And for everyone else's edification on 4th edition, how you're not going to be able to create your own spells as a player.
I did have actually one other thought, because you talked about the cost for spells, and we had discussed the legend point cost aspect of things.
Yes.
And how I think that that's really important in 4th edition, just to kind of address the toolkit, the Swiss Army knife of magicians and the number of options that they have available.
Absolutely.
Whether or not people ultimately agree with Morgan and I on that, that is the design paradigm that we're working with. So
yes. That being said,
so the other part of the cost is potentially cost in silver to acquire a spell. That is not necessarily something that would need to be paid every time. That's something that's in there because people will have the question, well, I just want to go and learn a spell from somebody. How much does it cost me to do that?
Yeah.
The same way that circle advancement has a training cost, the same way that learning skill ranks has a silver cost.
Yeah.
There are these training costs. How much would it cost me financially to go and just like hire a tutor to teach me a spell?
Yeah.
That's a basic thing. If you are going with a much more robust interaction and relationship and history with a magician NPC, you might not necessarily need to pay them in silver the cost from the book in order to maybe get a spell from them. You might exchange favors. You might use that as part of, well, how about I take a little bit of a lower cost for doing this job for you. In exchange, you will teach me a spell or two or something like that.
Yeah.
There is absolutely, like when it comes to the silver cost, there is nothing that needs to be held to a hard and fast guide, the hard and fast rule in that respect, if you're going with something a bit more in depth. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. So maybe maybe that player doesn't necessarily want to role play as you did, the downtime, learning of the spell, meeting the mentor, blah, 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 blah. They just want to get into the city, pay for it, get out and get on the next one. So that could be possible. Just, okay, here's the flat out cost. Wash your hands of the affair. See ya. Did you learn the guy's name? No, who cares? You get your spell and move on. So
that said, I think it is doing a disservice to your world building and the potential for future plot hooks.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you don't necessarily on that initial interaction go hugely in depth, you're dealing with a higher circle, an equal or higher circle NPC of that character's discipline. even if right now all they're looking for is to learn a useful new spell, that could be somebody that they would go back to in the future to train or advance in Circle.
Yeah.
Give them a name, give them a little bit of a hook, jot them down in your Game Master notes, because you should be keeping Game Master notes, so that they could come back potentially in the future if you want to.
Or perhaps I just had this idea in my head, of course, because it's not in my feet, that if maybe you've got a sparsely populated adventuring group and you've only got one spellcaster and you might need a second one, perhaps you as the Game Master create an NPC who's 2 or 3 or 4 circles above that player, like a Jedi and a Padawan learner type dynamic where they could learn directly.
Yeah, I would be a little bit careful about doing that as an NPC that would be traveling along with the group. Only because you want to be careful that your NPC, because they're a higher circle, does not outshine the player characters who really should be the focus of things.
Yeah.
There are plenty of horror stories, not just in Earthdawn, but in plenty of other games as well, where a Game Master NPC it's kind of overshines or overshadows the group because they're more powerful or whatever. You might start straining credibility when it comes to reasons why your journeyman magician is not solving all the problems that your novice group is facing.
Yeah. Fair.
So you would want to be careful about that. Depending on this type of game you run, having a higher circle Game Master character that is based in an area and acts as sort of a longer term mentor for the character, absolutely. I think that would be great. But
totally.
Adventuring with them is a potentially troublesome area if you're looking at somebody who is a higher circle and that kind of thing.
Fair.
Having a GM character going along because you've maybe got a small group where you've only got 2 or 3 players and you're kind of looking to fill a gap in their skill set. That's a little bit of a different situation. You probably want them to be more of a filling in the gaps as opposed to, I'm going to be the Qui-Gon to your Obi-Wan kind of thing.
Fair enough. Like I said, it was an idea. I wanted to make sure that we could at least cover that for anybody who else had the same thought at the same time I did. Who knows? But I defer. Absolutely. So
it can be done, just planting the little
caution flag,
yellow traffic cone, wet floor sign. Just be careful if you go into that area.
Exactly. I'm okay with that. Like I said, I just wanted to lead everybody through spell acquisition from the player side and kind of how to lace those in on the Game Master side, because my pool to draw from on the pre-gen adventures didn't have a lot of that, and so I wanted to make sure that we could start filling those in for Game Master's help and players to know where to ask for them. So if you have any questions for us on anything we covered today about spells and acquisition and what's now in 4th edition compared to the other ones, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. And as always, feel free to follow us on the various social media
places.
The official show feed on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Dan's on Twitter. There's the Earthdawn Guild. There are the FASA official Discord. There is the FASA forums, which do not see a whole lot of activity, but in their own way are a good resource because it's a lot easier to follow a particular conversation or discussion there as opposed to Discord where everything kind of scrolls off into the distance.
And you'll spend 3 days catching up. Yeah.
FASA is trying to figure out what sort of stuff we might do a bit more regularly on our Twitch channel, which we used in conjunction with FreedoniaCon. So if you are not following FASA Games Official on Twitch and you are a Twitch user, go ahead and drop that a follow. We were, based on the stats that kind of came out as a result of the weekend, actually kind of close to bumping up to affiliate status, which opens up some more options in terms of what we can do.
Nice.
And it's mostly follower count that's the limiter on that. So yeah, that's where we are.
Okay, cool. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Josh, for making the time. And we will see you next time. So until then, it is time for you to go acquire the spell for your own legend.
Good night, everybody.